So welcome to this afternoon's webinar on responding and supporting youth who have been trafficked or exploited. As I said, my name is Julie Moore and I'm the advocate here at Boost that works with these youth. So this afternoon, we're going to begin looking at more in depth at the specific supports that an advocate can offer to youth and family right from the time of a referral, including cases where charges are laid and we have to engage with the criminal justice system. We'll be looking at what we know to be vulnerability factors that enhance somebody's risk of being recruited and trafficked, and also looking at some of the challenges that come in supporting this population alongside emerging best practices that we can adopt. Boost Child and Youth Advocacy Centre officially opened its doors in October 2013. A co-located model houses all members of the multidisciplinary team needed in child abuse investigations. So this includes police, children's aid workers, advocates, counsellors, and medical support. In the model that we use, one advocate is assigned per family, and the advocacy program is a voluntary service. Criminal charges and an open child protection file are not requirements for advocacy services to be engaged with. Very early on, the benefit of having an advocate involved with families became apparent, and this timing coincided with the Human Trafficking Unit of Toronto Police Service reaching out to its core community partners for support in their work with individuals who've been trafficked. A 24/7 response emergency protocol was created with Toronto Police, Victim Services, Boost, and other community partners to ensure that an immediate and seamless response was created for those in need. The nice thing about the role of the advocate is that we're able to work with the youth even if they haven't provided a statement to police or made a full disclosure. They just have to be willing to work with an advocate. So before we move on any further, I'd ask you to just take a moment exploited, and so it's important to be open-minded and non-judgmental when working with this population. Human trafficking is defined broadly by the United Nations as the recruitment, transport, transfer, or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force or coercion for the purpose of exploitation. The act, means, and purpose are what indicate human trafficking. It's also important to keep in mind that this does not need to involve the movement from one location to another or the crossing of borders. So how does the advocate here at Boost support the youth and family? Well, as you can see from this slide, these are the most typical ways we support a youth and their family. For our program, we usually receive referrals through police or victim services. However, more recently, we have begun to establish more of a working relationship with child protection. And so now we're available to consult with them on individual cases and begin working with families if it makes sense. When we get the referral, the youth is contacted as soon as possible, usually within 24 hours. And when we meet with the youth, we carry out a comprehensive needs assessment with them to identify not only their immediate needs, but also looking at what we may be able to put in place for more long-term supports when and if they're ready. So we'll take a closer look at the needs and risk assessment in a moment. Initially as well, when we meet with the youth, we provide a lot of crisis support and psychoeducation around the different dynamics involved in human trafficking. These conversations are always ongoing whenever we meet with the youth or have any kind of communication with them, as circumstances and situations can change so quickly. When we're meeting with the youth in the beginning, as I said, it's quite likely that they're in a state of crisis, and so building a rapport with the youth is a crucial first step. This process can be time-consuming, but is absolutely essential. The trafficker has convinced them that they can only trust them and that nobody else has any real care for them. And if they did talk to anybody, nobody would believe them. So when working with these long-term unconditional support, be aware of the power dynamic in the relationship that you are developing with them. It's crucial for them to be able to begin to regain some feelings of empowerment and choice as they regain their emotional and psychological independence. Build a trusting relationship that allows them to see there are no judgments, conditions, and allow them to take the lead in their journey of healing. You're essentially there to provide them with options. Listen to what they identify as a priority for them. So, for example, you may see their addiction issues as something that needs to be addressed, but for them, that could have been their only way to survive their experiences. So by telling them it's a negative may shame them even more. Never take away anything unless you're able to offer something else in its place and that they agree to. Be patient with them. It's going to be a roller coaster both for you as a service provider as well as them. And be prepared for them to cycle in and out several times. Your role is to never judge, but always to be there. It's crucial when you provide it as well as them, and be prepared for them to cycle in and out several times. Your role is to never judge, but always to be there. It's crucial when you are working with them that you operate from a strength-based perspective. What you may view as unhealthy or aggressive behaviors or responses may very well have been the skills that have kept them alive to this point. So, for example, one of your initial questions when gathering information could be, what skills did you use to help you survive certain situations? For this, you're allowing them to have the feeling of empowerment and confidence and the opportunity for them to realize that they are stronger than what they may have thought. In the beginning, when you meet with a youth, it may seem that they are testing you and your responses with the information that they share with you. One youth in particular shared with me that she had in the past felt as though she needed to protect some of her workers because she would be able to see their reaction to some of the information that she shared with them. So try and remain as neutral as possible in your reactions and allow them free narrative to disclose as little or as much as they can. The validation piece is so important throughout all of your interactions with them. A large piece of the work that we do with the youth related to the human trafficking is around healthy relationships, looking at consent versus informed consent, the stages of exploitation and the stages of change. And it's not uncommon for the youth to not even be able to identify that they're being exploited. So this is crucial when we're looking at explaining around relationships and the stages of exploitation. Again, when we meet with the youth, we're also looking to help them support some basic coping strategies to assist them with emotional regulation. So, example, maybe looking at grounding skills. In situations where the youth is returning home, we offer supports to the family to help ease that transition. A lot of the time, the parents think that the child that left is the same one that's returning home, and that's not the case. Their child has seen and experienced so many different situations and circumstances that as parents, they can't even begin to reason. So, behaviors and reactions can seem confusing and challenging for parents or caregivers and siblings. The most valuable thing that a caregiver can do is to provide the unconditional love and support to their child upon their return. And just like the relationship with service providers, it's going to take time, patience, and support to begin rebuilding their relationships. You will likely see a change in their sleeping and eating patterns. And so some of the work that we do with the caregivers is educating them around why that may be. So explaining to them that likely their child would have been awake all night or catching sleep when they could, and that's going to impact them now. It will take them time to realize that now they're able to fall asleep without fear of being woken up at a moment's notice to go to work. Many parents share that their child is always on guard as they're waiting for something to happen. So again, explaining that quite often during their experience, they would have always had to have been alert, assessing every situation and interaction and adapting accordingly. Other parents report that their child come home and sleep all the time, and again, providing the education that they really would have been living on just a few hours of sleep that were never truly restful, and now being back home, they're just completely exhausted. It may seem like basic information, but it can make such a difference in how they respond to their child. So essentially, you're helping to support this family develop a new normal routine. So developing predictable schedules for the youth, which will offer some comfort and safety and assist in reducing their feelings of insecurity and fear. So we work a lot with caregivers also around managing their expectations when their child is returned home and explaining that there'll be good days and bad days and that for the next while their expectations may have to be adapted. A frequent response that we have from caregivers is that they're simply just not going to allow their child to leave the house unsupervised. They'll take away their phones and they'll take away the internet. None of this is realistic and sends a strong message to the youth that you blame them and don't trust them. It builds resentment and they quite likely will become withdrawn and just secretive in their behavior. So part of the work we do with caregivers is education around online safety. So letting them know that it's okay to have the conversation with the youth, that you're concerned for their safety and that you want to work together to create a sense of security for them whilst respecting some independence that the youth needs. So for example, with some of the younger children, the compromise may be that the parents are giving their password to their phones or they leave their phone with their parents at night. If it's approached in a supportive way and the youth is involved, there's more chance of it succeeding. Also, it's important to work with the parents or caregivers to educate them on what's normal age-appropriate behavior. So it's not everything the youth does is always related back to the trafficking experience. For example, we had a young girl who was trafficked and then returned home. She had adjusted fairly well and was back at school experience. For example, we had a young girl who was trafficked and then returned home. She had adjusted fairly well and was back at school. But one day, Mum called in a panic saying that the school had called her to let her know she'd skipped a class. Normal teen behaviour, but Mum was panicking that she was being trafficked again. So we were able to work with Mum and reduce her stress over the phone, and we discussed that it's normal for kids to skip school, and reminded her that to keep her reactions in perspective of what she actually did versus what Mum thought was the reasons behind her doing this. Another question that we quite often have from caregivers is who should be told what happened. So again, they may be approaching it from a safety perspective, but to the youth, it's just another situation where they're being open to being judged and continue to feel shame and blame. So we always want to try to start those discussions with, why would you be sharing this with somebody? What's the reason behind it? It's always helpful to involve the youth as well in that conversation. We also work with caregivers and group home staff. Even in situations where a child is not willing or able to engage in services, we're still able to provide that support to staff and caregivers. And that typically looks like education and psychoeducation and information around the dynamics involved in human trafficking, more in a general term. But very often we have questions around, like, how could this have happened? How did we miss this? And how can they support their child moving forward? In some cases, the youth are still being trafficked, or they may just not be even able to recognize that they were exploited. Something else we're able to do when it comes to assisting to ongoing community referrals is helping with the process of returning back to school. And we'll look at this in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. So as I said, we're able to make referrals to additional community agencies and supports, and we do that on an ongoing basis. Another useful resource that we have is the funding that's designated specifically for human trafficking cases, and we access that through the Victim Quick Response Program that Victim Services offers. So this funding is designed specifically for youth that have been trafficked, and it includes such as basic needs, inpatient treatment facilities, detox, dental work, tattoo removal. And this program is funded provincially and administered via Victim Services. So in those cases, we loop back to our Victim Services worker who's able to complete the paperwork for this to be accessed. And this is really helpful, especially for youth who are living independently, to be able to get the basic needs and sometimes accommodation funding assisted is really useful. When the youth is ready to begin counselling, we're able to access some of the funding through this to have them connected with a counsellor in their community. We also have counsellors for the youth and also provide caregiver support as well. In cases where charges are laid, we work very closely with the victim witness worker in the courthouse to support them through the entire process. And we'll look at the court process later on in the presentation. One of the nice things about the role of the advocate is that we're that one consistent person that walks alongside the youth right the way through the process and builds that trusting relationship with them. Right from the outset, it is explained to the youth that there are multiple people that we can bring onto their team at various stages along the way to be able to help them in specific ways. Always keep in mind that they are the experts in their lives and that our role is more to provide them with options and educate them on supports out there, but ultimately nothing is decided without their consent. So let's look a little bit more closely at the risk and needs assessment that we do. So when we first meet with them, we're focusing on their basic needs. So if they aren't housed anywhere, how can we help them with housing? One of the biggest challenges is finding the immediate safe housing. And for the age group that we typically work with, CAS is involved, and the youth is either being placed into a group or foster home or returning back to the family home. However, with older youth who aren't connected with CAS, finding that immediate shelter can be a challenge. Usually our options are limited to the shelter system, which comes with its own set of challenges. If we have to have a youth stay at a shelter, then we try and have daily contact with them to check in and see how they're doing, and always try and have a primary worker assigned with them at the shelter immediately. In certain cases, we are able to access funding for them to stay very short term in a hotel, but always be mindful of the triggers that this may cause, especially if they've been trafficked through hotels. Can we access the human trafficking funding for basic necessities, so like grocery, very short term in a hotel, but always be mindful of the triggers that this may cause, especially if they've been trafficked through hotels. Can we access the human trafficking funding for basic necessities, so like groceries, accommodation? If we can, then we definitely should do. So have they provided a statement to police? If so, has the trafficker been arrested? Are they out on bail? We work really closely with the officers at Toronto Police Human Trafficking Unit, who are really great at providing updates on this to both the advocate and to the youth themselves directly. And the police will do their own risk assessment on any accused, and based on that, will determine what safety precautions we need to put in place with the youth. So whether it's like basic safety planning, if we have to move them out of the city or the province, the police are really good at giving us updates on the whole issue of safety. Does the youth have their phone? If so, we meet with them and go through their phones to turn off any physical location. Are there any gang affiliations between the accused? Have their family or loved ones been threatened? In one particular case, they were, and we had to move the family into a secure location until the accused was arrested. So, one of the ways that the traffickers control the youth is by having them believe they have eyes and ears everywhere. And in this case, with this girl, she wouldn't even attend a medical appointment because she was fearful that the trafficker would know and would harm her family. And this is a common tactic used with the youth. And while this often isn't the case, the perceived sense of danger and risk is very real to the youth and their families, so it should never be discounted or minimized. Social media. Everybody's on social media. So we sit down with the youth and we typically suggest they take a break from social media and shut down their old accounts and create new ones. Quite often, that's not something they want to do. So we go through and look at their friends. Do they actually know all of their friends? Is there any way that the trafficker is know all of their friends? Is there any way that the trafficker is connected via other friends that they have via Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook? And we try and really streamline who the youth have that has access to their account. If the police has taken their phone for evidence, then we try and connect with victim services to at least have a basic one provided for them. Do they have addiction issues? Should we be looking into a detox facility for them? Are they asking for that? If so, we can loop back to victim services again to be able to access the funding for this. However, something to keep in mind around this area is that the drugs and alcohol may have been the things that help them through their appointments, their clients. So whilst we may consider this a priority to address for the youth, they may not at this time. One of the other specific fundings that we can access is around the dental and tattoo removal. So we had one, and we've also begun to build relationships with local tattoo artists who are willing to work with us and the youth to change or remove any of the branding tattoos that they have. We're also in the process of developing formal partnerships with the school boards here to address such issues to navigate the system when a youth is ready to return to school. So some of the challenges could be, does the youth even want to return to the same school? Can they return to the same school? If not, how do we get them connected in a different school? What happens if they've missed so much time that now they have to repeat a grade? It can be pretty complicated. And so the hope is that at some point we will have a go-to person that we can reach out to that will help us navigate the system on a higher level until we can actually get the youth connected to a specific school. Once the youth is connected with a school, we typically connect with the school social worker or guidance counselor, and that's the point person moving forward. So try and limit the number of people. Once the youth is connected with a school, we typically connect with the school social worker or guidance counselor, and that's the point person moving forward. So try and limit the number of people that you have as a service provider are being connected with within the school system. Sometimes it causes confusion and things can get missed. So the youth will still likely be feeling some sense of shame or embarrassment or other negative emotions. And so it's important as well to provide the staff with education around the impact of human trafficking, more so in a general sense, as opposed to individual with relation to the youth that's attending the school. But engage the youth also in how much they feel comfortable with you sharing about their specific experience. One young lady, we were helping her transition back into school, and so she had asked that the school social worker and her principal check in with her frequently to check in and see how she was doing. However, after attention to herself with other students as to why the principal was showing so much interest in her. So, working with the school social worker, we were able to alter the way the staff reached out to her. So, she was still able to get the support that she needed, but without the rest of the school as she felt being aware. One of our partner agencies at the CYAC is the Hospital for Sick Children, their SCAN department. So, this is the Suspected Child Abuse and Neglect Program. At the CYC location, we have a nurse practitioner that's able to carry out basic medical examinations and provide additional services at the hospital location. When we're completing the initial assessment, the medical support is one thing that's always offered. So the nurse and her team are able to offer STI testing, pregnancy testing, birth control, sexual assault kits, and also sexual health information and education to them. So quite often from fear and embarrassment, the medical piece can be so overwhelming for them. So knowing that this is a person that's working from a non-judgmental perspective who can also join their team of support is helpful in connecting them with these medical people. It's important that whoever is providing this support does come from a non-judgmental perspective and is flexible with appointment times and just being able to really be there for the youth. For some youth, having culturally appropriate supports is important to them, and yet for others, they do not want to be connected with services specifically related to their community or their culture. So it's always really important to ask and never to assume. And then based on their responses, you would then begin connecting them with the supports that they need. In some of the cases, the youth may have their own charges, either related to trafficking or for misdemeanors such as shoplifting. So I know at Boost we have good relationships with agencies such as Justice for Children and Youth. We also have a partnership with a local law firm who have staff willing to, as we spoke about before, another big component is if the youth is returning home or into a group home or foster placement. So being able to work with those adults to help transition the youth returning back is always so important. So as we said, they have many common areas of questions or concerns around like the behaviors and responses of what's happened to their youth, mainly how can they support them moving forward. One of the other conversations that we have with parents is around the relationship that the youth may have with the trafficker, and if there's other girls that they were trafficked with. So we had one girl in particular who felt guilty about leaving behind the other girls and really struggled to move past that and her concern for them and how they were doing. And her parents couldn't really understand why she had this concern, and just telling her that they would be fine and they didn't care about them, they were just focused on her. And whilst that may have been supportive from the parents' perspective, for her, she felt like they were just dismissing her concerns. And so we were able to work with the parents to help them understand that she was grieving the loss of those friendships. However much they couldn't understand it, it was a real relationship to her. And we'll talk a little bit more about trauma bonding and that emotional relationship piece in a few moments. At the CYAC, we try and have the advocate work with the youth and connect the caregivers to ongoing support with one of our counsellors here at the centre. This allows for the youth to truly feel as though they have their own person, and this minimises the resistance in opening up for fear of the information being shared with caregivers. In some of our cases, though, the youth are not ready or able to leave their situation, and so we are mindful of the stages of change model when we're supporting them. So the stages of change model are essentially the steps that a youth will cycle through when working towards exiting a situation. It's by no means a linear process, and the youth needs a support person to be able to operate and be adaptable and flexible as they move through the different stages. It's all about empowering the youth with education and information on options that they can access depending on where they are in their journey. So the model begins with the pre-contemplative stage, which is some of the youth that we see here at the CYAC. That's the stage that they're at. So they don't identify as being exploited and will likely refuse services initially. So what we do in those meetings is support them by affirming their feelings and helping to build resources for them, so crisis lines, safety planning, and then gently asking them if there was anything they could change in their relationship, what could that be and why? So then we move on to the contemplative stage, which we engage in conversations with the youth about what is positive and negative in their life. We identify some of the potential challenges that they may face, either in the negative in their life. We identify some of the potential challenges that they may face, either in the process of leaving or after the fact, and identify the supports that are concrete that we could put in place. At this stage, you should be hearing a change in some of the language that's being used in how they are talking about their situations and their relationship with the trafficker. The preparation stage is when we're looking at short-term and long-term goals. So validating their fears, but encouraging the change. And at this stage, you have a concrete exit plan in place. Also, you need to ensure you have the emotional and physical safety planning in place as well. So the stage of action is when they're ready to leave, when they believe they have the power to change the situation and begin making decisions to do so. You will see them adopting different behaviors and responses that help facilitate them moving out of the situation and moving on to a healthier life. And finally, the maintenance stage, ensuring that there are long-term supports in place for the youth based on what they identify. And finally, when we meet with the youth, we also look to see if they have any supports in place already. So this could be formal or informal supports. And if they do, we can offer to connect with that individual or agency and work with them also. So now let's move into the stages of grooming and exploitation and what that can look like. You're all probably very skilled at recognizing changes in a youth's behavior, and so hopefully this will give you some additional red flags to maybe make you more aware of that potentially may mean that they are at high risk of being exploited. So we tend to think of this as the different stages that traffickers move through when grooming the youth, and we begin with the act of luring. And this can be done in various ways using various approaches. The youth I've worked with have been lured both via social media and in person. We know that traffickers will frequent locations where youth will likely hang out, so shopping malls, transit stations, group homes, and shelters. And more recently, we've actually seen them hanging outside of local high schools. The age that most youth are targeted is early to mid-teens, a time when they are beginning to develop their own sense of self and where they fit into the world. They are easily influenced by peers and social media, making it so much easier for them to be targeted by a trafficker. So when a trafficker is looking for a youth to potentially recruit, they will spend so much time identifying their vulnerabilities. We also know at this age as well, it's a lot easier for youth to be influenced by the dream of a glamorous lifestyle that the trafficker will likely offer them. They'll begin by asking so many questions about them, their home life, their family, their friends, their hobbies, and really creating this feeling of interest to the youth. And they do it so skillfully that the youth does not even realize this is happening. Once they have all of that information gathered and knowledge of the youth's vulnerabilities, they swoop in and begin to fill that void. And this could be done for anything. So, for example, lack of finance, talk to at home, there will be that listening ear. Parenting conflict, they'll provide them with a safe space for them to go to, which is usually their apartment, to give them a break from the struggles at home. This process will help build a stronger emotional connection between the youth and the trafficker. And so often we hear from them that they were the only person that understood them and what they were going through. And until this relationship void is filled with a healthy influence, the trafficker will always be their main source of support in their eyes. This period of time is often referred to as the honeymoon period, and when the relationship becomes abusive and exploitive, this is the period of time that the youth is constantly craving and striving to get back to. Traffickers will sometimes use a different approach by having a female recruit another female, and this is typically considered a more softer recruitment strategy, and the relationship is built on a friendship. So, not unlike male recruiters, they will spend time getting to know the youth, asking questions, paying attention, and then gradually introducing them to maybe their boyfriend, taking them to parties. So pay attention if you see a youth who's suddenly developed a new friendship that seems to be moving really quickly. This is also the case quite often in group home settings. So never be afraid to jump in and intersect a conversation in the house if you begin to see this as a pattern between two girls. Once the trafficker feels secure in their relationship with the youth, the manipulation and coercion begins. The relationship between the youth and the trafficker at this point is alternating between love and affection and abuse and punishment. The relationship is not dissimilar to that of intimate partner violence. And we'll look at this relationship in more depth in a few moments, as this is crucial in the workers and the support's understanding to be able to respond to the youth and really be able to give them the support that they need. From the youth that I work with, there's limited relationship connection with a trafficker. Workers and the support's understanding to be able to respond to the youth and really be able to give them the support that they need. From the youth that I work with, there's limited relationship connection with a trafficker. Our experience has been that the girls view the trafficker with affection, then this is the hardest thing to work around. Traffickers will purposefully begin to isolate the youth from any source of positive or healthy influence in their lives. This can include them physically intercepting the messages and calls on their phones from concerned parents, friends, support workers. This was the case in one of the situations for a girl I worked with. The trafficker had successfully convinced her that she had been rejected by her family and that if they really cared about her, they would have reached out to her. The reality was that the trafficker had blocked the numbers from almost everybody in her life and was monitoring her phone on a daily basis. So by doing this, the youth becomes completely dependent on the trafficker for all of their needs, their emotional, physical, financial. Continue reaching out to the youth via any means that you can if this is happening, and try and remain in contact with them as much as possible. But be mindful that your communication and outreach, that you don't actually know who's monitoring or has access to their phones. So try and keep the communication more of a general. When we think of someone being trafficked, the stereotypical picture is one of violence and fear. However, more often than not, this is not the case, and so often the control is not the physical, but the emotional and psychological. Many of the girls I work with have at some point stated that this was their choice and they blame themselves for what happened. So, a big piece of what we support them around is the idea of informed consent. We spend time talking about what it means to have choices and how choices should have the most positive outcomes for the person making them. We talk about how the information that the trafficker will share with them is skewed to their perspective and it's not always accurate. They will likely tell you they knew what they were getting involved. The trafficker may have said, if you don't want to do anything, you don't have to. That's not the case. They'll tell them that they will be there to protect them. That's not always the case. These manipulations and mindsets by the trafficker are barriers to the youth being able to physically and emotionally leave a situation. So just one quick example of the manipulation that the trafficker used with a young girl I'm working with. She was a Crown ward and had no family, no friends, and this individual recruited her via social media. So initially there were Instagram messages which progressed to texting, then calls, and finally the suggestion to meet in person. She began a relationship with him, and within 5 months he had suggested that she escort for them to save money to be able to get an apartment together, and that he would be there when she had clients, they would be in this together. So she was forced to provide sexual services in her home, and the boyfriend was definitely not there when the clients came. When she made the disclosure and went to the pit for several months before the direct conversation of escorting took place, the relationship had changed. He had become more short-tempered with her, reducing the time he spent with her, had begun to separate the idea of sex with a relationship between the two of them. In fact, he even suggested in joke that she should have sex with his friend as a gift. When she questioned his response, he was like, "It's just sex." She believed him that he loved her and wanted to get back to that honeymoon period, and so she felt pressured to doing this. We also discussed that he had told her they would be in it together, and through conversation, she was able to realize that, again, this was not the case. So gradually over time, she came to realize the manipulations and the exploitation that he had carried out. However, now this has produced a whole new set of feelings and emotions that she is now working through. When you think of risk factors that increase someone's vulnerability to being trafficked, what comes to mind? We know that the majority of you have a whole new set of feelings and emotions that she is now working through. When you think of risk factors that increase someone's vulnerability to being trafficked, what comes to mind? We know that the majority of youth who are trafficked are female, so the mere fact that you're female increases your risk. We also know that boys are less likely to make a disclosure when they are being trafficked and report to police if they are being exploited. The most common age for a youth to be recruited, as we said, is the exact stage where they are developmentally vulnerable as they're trying to figure out where they fit into the world. Those with the highest risk of being exploited may share some of the following characteristics. and a combination of individual factors and societal factors increase their vulnerability even more so. So youth who have a history of child abuse, chronic runaways, parent-teen conflict, addiction issues, mental health, low self-esteem and confidence, and not feeling adequately or to being exploited. The stereotypical myth that a youth who is trafficked comes from the single-parent family and community housing is thankfully understood now not to be true or accurate. I have several cases with youth coming from intact families who can provide everything materialistically, but the quality of time that the youth craves with her family was not present. One young lady shared that for several nights of the week, her parents would be either working late, have work functions, and so would not be home. She filled that time with online activity, and that was how she was recruited. For service providers, teachers, child protection workers, take time to have conversations with your vulnerable youth. Ask them open-ended questions about any new friends that they may have or a new boyfriend. For those of you working in group home settings, pay attention, as we said before. If you see two girls becoming extremely close very fast, or two boys, don't be afraid to insert yourself into the conversation and try and break that up a little bit. Some additional that may be red flags to a youth being trafficked or at high risk include sudden changes in behavior, so becoming very secretive or withdrawn, hanging out with a new group of friends but not really willing to introduce them to you or talk about them a whole lot, disappearing for extended periods of time without any communication, and then when returning, not being able to tell you where they were, unexplained mood swings, changes in the language that they use, so more street slang, which is uncommon for them, increased online activity, multiple phones, a slip in school attendance, and a change in physical appearance. So this can be anything from like a decrease in personal hygiene, tattoos or bruising or burns, to the opposite end of the spectrum, with their nails always done, their hair always done, and new clothes that they're not able to explain how they were able to purchase them. So one of the biggest challenges we face when working with youth who've been trafficked can be the relationship that's developed between the youth and the trafficker. Commonly referred to as trauma bonding, this is as a result of complex emotions, feelings, and experiences that are created, which in turn alter the individual's perception of reality. So essentially, gradually over time, they begin looking at things through the perspective of the trafficker, and gradually a person's sense of self is eroded and broken down. So what do we know about attachment? Well, it's crucial for children to develop secure attachment with adults throughout childhood to allow them to develop as confident and secure individuals. It's also the process that allows them to develop healthy relationships with others and provide them with the tools and skills to deal with the challenges and stresses that life can often throw up. What is missing from this youth population in their lives is key to understanding what may have contributed to their increased vulnerability, materialistic, etc., what they don't have at home. For the youth you are connecting with, you may see a combination of both avoidant and ambivalent attachment when you are working with them. So this could look like the youth testing you, challenging you to see if you're shocked, disappointed by scenarios they share with you, or simply testing you to see if you'll stick around, blowing hot and cold with their responses and interactions with you. But it's important to remember that they are basing these interactions in relation to their previous relationship history, which is why it's so important for workers to be able to remain involved on a long-term basis. Throughout the course of the abuse, the trafficker will cycle between periods of affection and reward to punishment and violence, so not unlike, as we said, intimate partner violence relationships. As a result, over the period of time, the youth begins to lose all sense of self and takes on the beliefs, values, and opinions of the trafficker. This intense emotional attachment that is developed is very relationships. As a result, over the period of time, the youth begins to lose all sense of self and takes on the beliefs, values, and opinions of the trafficker. This intense emotional attachment that is developed is very difficult to shift, and those working with the trafficked youth have to be available to support them long term. It's not uncommon for the youth to refuse to provide a statement to police or testify in court cases because they are still bonded to the trafficker, and this is what the trafficker is banking on. Some of the most common tactics that we see being used are humiliation, fear, violence, and isolation. And skillfully, as we said, the trafficker will isolate the youth from anything positive influence they may have in their life. It will make them think that they have eyes and ears everywhere, and combined with any threats to their family or loved ones, the girls will feel like they are under 24/7 surveillance. Whether this is actually true or not, the perceived sense of threat is very real for the youth, and never assume they are being controlled by physical threats in their relationship. But when there are no physical barriers to the youth leaving a situation, family and service providers can often be confused as to why they didn't just leave. The power imbalance between the trafficker and the youth may not be visible like bruises, but it can be just as powerful, if not more. We also know that the youth will often bear legal consequence for the trafficker as a way to win back his attentions and love. They will likely have spent a great deal of their relationship appeasing the trafficker without even realizing what it is. They will likely report that they have been constantly de-escalating situations when the relationship was not going well. And many have shared with me that they would not do what they had to in order that the situation would end with the trafficker so he wouldn't be aggressive towards them. When we begin working with the youth, it's crucial to listen to the language they use about this relationship. This will provide you with critical insight and shapes about this relationship. This will provide you with critical insight and shape how you approach your work with them. Pay attention to how they explain the ways the trafficker fills the void in their lives. Pay attention to how they refer to the trafficker. There might also be other girls working that the trafficker has, and so has created a sense of family. Has their trafficker paid attention to them in ways no one else has ever done before? Asking questions about them and really listening to their responses. We know that this is to gather information to assist them in their stages of exploitation, but to the youth, they believe this is genuine. As we talked about earlier in the presentation, the trafficker will skillfully erode any sense of self and belief that the youth may have, and as a result, we often hear from the youth a great deal of self-blame and shame with what they have experienced. So let's look at some of the challenges that can be experienced when working with this population. Sometimes it can be frustrating and confusing for workers regarding rarely do they self-identify, and this of itself can be challenging. And if they do acknowledge what has happened, depending on the age of the youth, the relationship with the trafficker, and the length of time they were exploited, their responses will be different. Remember that some of their resistance to be able to identify their exploitation is probably what helped them survive their experience. So linking it back to a strengths-based approach with your questions will hopefully be able to build some rapport with them and allow them to see this over time. So reframing to highlight their strengths in survival situations and circumstances, because their trafficker will likely have manipulated them into believing that this was their choice. So they actually may not be able to see how they were exploited, which is why it's really important when you're working with them to focus on relationships and the idea of consent and informed consent. Their ability to be able to trust anyone other than their trafficker also brings its own challenges. They will have been told that nobody cares for them like the trafficker does, and combined with the isolation from anybody positive in their life, this distorted reality becomes their actual reality. It may also be, depending on their situation, the only time they have ever been in a family environment. And so acknowledging the grief that they feel at the breakdown of this is important. We have to make sure that when we're offering supports to youth, that it is immediate, and one of the challenges we consistently have is accessing immediate safe housing. All too often, the only immediate housing, if they aren't returning home to caregivers or placed with child protection, is the shelter system. And we know that this is one of the locations that traffickers recruit, so it brings a whole new set of challenges and issues. If the shelter system is the only option that they have, then we typically try to attend with the intake with them and advocate for accommodations to be put in place, and that a primary worker is assigned that has some knowledge of human trafficking and the relationship dynamics. If a youth is placed outside of the city by CAS, then we try and connect with the foster parents or a designated staff person at the group home so we can offer support and education around human trafficking. Another challenge can be that the youth are so transient at times and that it's difficult to maintain consistent contact with them. We have found that we have to be pretty creative in ways to connect with them. So they always seem to be able to find Wi-Fi somewhere. So if you can message with them via text or email, then that's kind of the way that we usually connect with youth that we don't meet with on a regular basis. Their safety, both emotionally and physically. Some of the youth may return to their trafficker because this is what they consider their life, or if they have no other secure accommodation. So in those cases, we can work with the youth to do or if they have no other secure accommodation. So in those cases, we can work with the youth to do concrete safety planning around specific situations. Another challenge is returning to a quote unquote normal routine of life. For so long, their normal has been lack of boundaries and routines that adjusting to the expectations of others can be challenging. Structure that appears to be simple for most may present as anxious situations for some youth, so be patient and listen to how they are feeling. Always be encouraging of small victories. It's crucial to help empower them and build their confidence and self-esteem, such as being able to attend school, help with chores, and developing a sleep hygiene routine. So what do we know about emerging best practices to effectively be able to support this population? There's actually limited research out there in this field, but we do know that working from a non-judgmental, strength-based approach is key, being flexible in the eligibility of services. So typically we would reach out to a family for a period of time, and then if we didn't hear back, we would close the file, assuming that services are not required at this time. For our human trafficked youth, we feel that we never really close a file. We just mark them as active or inactive. What we usually find is that the contact with them is based on cycles of crisis. So if something is happening in their world, they may reach out for support. You can provide that to them, and then it all goes quiet again until they need something else. And this is service providers can be tough to deal with as you're left wondering, how are they doing? Be prepared to offer ongoing services, as it will be a lengthy process to just build rapport with the youth before you may even be able to have them engage with additional supports. Listen to what they tell you as a priority and work from that standpoint. As we know, the needs of this population are complex and diverse. So having community agency and organization collaboration is vital. No one can do this alone. Right from the first time we meet the youth, we want to dispel the idea that the trafficker created for them, that they can't trust anybody. Let them know that there are people out there who can support them when they are ready. We have found the role of the advocate crucial in facilitating the introduction of others onto their team. So take the time as a worker to connect with specific people in other agencies, so when the time is right for the youth to be introduced, you have a good sense of that person. This will really help the youth being on board and at least attend an introductory meeting with them. Be aware of your physical environment. They need space that's welcoming yet secure and creates an environment of confidentiality. Never make a promise to them unless you know you can keep it. It may sound basic, but in your need to try and engage with them, it could happen. If you make a promise that you can't keep, it runs out you. They need someone who will walk alongside them in this journey and have respect for them and their needs and their wishes. If you have a youth that you're concerned about being exploited, don't try and rescue them and pull them out unless you have a safe and secure location you can take them to and the youth agrees. You could be increasing their risk of safety if the trafficker finds them, or if they return because what you offered fell through or it wasn't what they wanted. In those cases, it's better to work with the youth to create a concrete safety plan towards an exit strategy if that's what they want. Remember, this is about them and not you swooping in to rescue. When working to create goals, keep them small and attainable. If they aren't, then it will just reinforce what the trafficker said about them in a negative way. Be honest with the youth about what you can and cannot do with regards to your professional capacity. Being upfront with them helps create boundaries and expectations in the developed negative way. Be honest with the youth about what you can and cannot do with regards to your professional capacity. Being upfront with them helps create boundaries and expectations in the developing relationship. Never claim to know how they are feeling. You don't. It's important to validate how challenging it must be and help them focus on their strengths that help them survive certain situations. When meeting with them, listen to the language and mirror it. If she refers to the trafficker as her boyfriend, you do the same. This will give you the best insight into where they are in that moment and help shape your interactions moving forward. Once you have a clearer understanding and more of an established relationship, you can gently begin exploring their feelings and beliefs. Allow them time when they are talking about their experiences without jumping in and offering suggestions or advice. One of the most relevant quotes I think I've heard that can relate to this population is sit in silence and just listen. Maybe the first time this has ever happened for this youth. Celebrate the victories. As service providers, we have our own agenda and goals when working with youth, but it's important to remember that this is about them and not us. So, for example, if you make an appointment with a youth for 1 o'clock and they show at 2, celebrate the fact that they came to the appointment and not focus on why they are late. We have no idea what they went through to get here. So when we're working to support youth going through court, we know that it's a very stressful time for them. So it typically takes between 8 months to a year, and recently the province of Ontario has developed a strategic response for these cases, which allow Crown attorneys to have specific training to best be able to support victims in these cases. So youth have reported that multiple meetings with the Crown have been extremely helpful for them. It helps create a sense of safety and also values and validates. It helps create a sense of safety and also values and validates that they are important and that they matter. Many of the video statements taken by police are lengthy in time, and before having to testify, the youth will have to watch them to refresh their memory. More often than not, they are reluctant to physically have to sit there and see what they look like back then. So it's really important, if your youth is hesitant to look at the video statement, to talk about why that may be. In many of our cases, we have multiple accused, which means multiple defense lawyers. Given the nature of the questions that the lawyers are asking, it's important to talk to them about how the defense lawyer is just doing a job, and that it is the response of the youth that is the evidence, not the questions that the lawyer is asking. In some cases, youth are also accustomed to being directed to talk to adults, and they feel compelled to agree with the lawyer. So take the time to talk with them and reassure them that it's okay to disagree respectfully with the lawyer. But once they reach 18, we have to do a separate application to the court. So it's important that they are educated around the options and supports that they have. Make sure there's a plan for the supports in the days leading up to and after the court case. We work closely with all of the supports that the youth are connected to and ensure as best as we can that we have a plan. This is something that the youth needs to be included in, but typically consists of emotional safety planning, crisis and help phone numbers, what the day in court will look like, pick up and drop off, some activity or someone with the youth in the evening times. If they're connected with a counsellor, we suggest booking appointments on either end of the court process. For anyone having to testify, it is an extremely stressful and frightening experience. Lots of worries and fears can be experienced, so talk to the youth as to what they are and how you can convey this information to the officer, the Crown, and the victim witness worker. We are constantly hearing similar concerns that the youth have, so let's take a moment to look at what they are and how we can help minimize them. The issue of safety is always paramount, and it's important that this is addressed to the youth directly. Sometimes we forget this as workers, as we're so used to being in and out of court. Ask if the youth has any specific concerns. It's usually seeing the accused and any of their entourage that may be in attendance. For us, we try and have an officer pick up the youth and bring to the courthouse, and in some cases, the advocate is able to travel with the officer. So think about the layout of your courthouse too. Do you have to walk past the waiting area to get to the victim witness office or the courtroom? If so, coordinate the timing of the arrival of the youth to minimize the chance of them seeing the accused. Another concern is that the girls I work with is not being able to remember certain dates or times. So it's important to explain to them that it's not a memory test and that it's perfectly understandable. They've experienced a traumatic event and the memory is not able to be stored in an organized way. And it's understandable. They've experienced a traumatic event and the memory is not able to be stored in an organized way and so becomes fragmented. And this is something we're not able to consciously control. So this can help remove some of the pressure from the youth. Another concern is the cross-examination process, especially when there are multiple accused. As we've said, that means multiple lawyers. Fear of not being believed. We try and explain to the youth that merely being here and having charges laid by police shows that they were believed. So try and focus less on the outcome of the case and more on the strength that the youth has to be able to get to this point. They also experience fear of being judged by those in the courtroom, and the feelings of shame are also concerns that the youth share with us. Also, keep in mind it's the time that they potentially will be seeing the accused for the first time, so that in of itself will bring up a whole set of emotions. Thank you so much for listening this afternoon and for all of your dedication working with those youth who have been trafficked. Okay, so one of the questions we have is, how do most of the girls come into contact with Boost and the Youth Advocate? So typically we get the referral from either Toronto Police, Victim Services, and lately we've been developing more of a relationship with Child Protection. So because of the changes here with child protection support being offered up until the age of 18, we've had a few consultations with workers. So it ranges from police, victim services, or child protection. So another question was asked around any reading materials. So there's the Polaris website, which is based in the United States. So that's a really good website. Shared Hope. Yeah, there's a few out there. So it looks like there's no more questions. Thank you so much for listening this afternoon and enjoy the rest of your day.